Joining me now is former U.S. Trade Ambassador Robert Lighthizer, who was the principal author of the recent USMCA trade deal. Bob Lighthizer, welcome back as always. Can Whitmer do that, first of all? And second of all, was that area covered under USMCA also, when you have a disagreement?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Larry. Thank you for having me back on the show. So the answer is she probably cannot do it. I mean, I haven't studied all the details, but this is a 1977 agreement. It's an actual treaty. It was approved by 2/3 of the Senate. There's an arbitration provision under that. I don't think you'll see a U.S. court get involved. I think what you're going to see is an arbitration. There'll be three people. They'll make the decision. My guess is that what is going on here is that the Biden administration is probably a little concerned about getting crosswise with their environmental supporters, and they just as soon let the arbitrators make the decision. So Canada has a very strong case, I believe. It's always up to the arbitrators, but we'll see what happens. But this predates USMCA and actually predates, you'll remember, the old U.S.-Canada agreement. This is an independent treaty, and this will supersede U.S. law, and there's an arbitration. So I think we're going to see this go through arbitration, and Canada has a very strong case.
Yeah, I mean, she thinks she has her own foreign policy, her own trade policy. I know she thought she had her own pandemic policy. A lot of that stuff got overturned. All right, so there's no new conflict resolution in USMCA. I thought there might have been.
Now, well, we have dispute settlement in USMCA, but this is an older treaty. It's very, very clear that there's arbitration, and as you know, treaties supersede U.S. law. So this is. There'll be binding arbitration in this case, and that'll be the resolution, I believe. All
right. Let me turn to the China trade. U.S. Trade Rep Tai, your successor, so she gave a speech at ISIS and CSIS, rather. So they're going to keep the Trump tariffs on, but not everyone was really happy with her speech. The Wall Street Journal said it was devoid of any particular content. And one thing I wanted to raise as you go through this, Bob, this business about Chinese courts, which is to say the Chinese government, now giving a free pass to people who are stealing intellectual property again, which you work so hard, we all work so hard to get in, the Phase 1 China deal. What's up with all that?
Well, I mean, let's face it, the Chinese government at this point is changing the relationship between business and the government. They're doubling down on state control. They have their own reasons to do it, I'm sure. The big date in the life of Xi Jinping is next March, when they'll probably set in motion his being able to be reappointed president the following year. They're moving very much in the direction of state control in what you would think of as actual communist policies. And this is just one more example of it. We'll see what happens when, I think what you're referring to is that their courts can enjoin globally people enforcing their law anywhere. We'll see how that works out. In practice, that may end up being a violation of one of the U.S. agreements, including Phase 1. We'll see how that is. At this point, I haven't seen an actual example of it, but they're certainly talking about it. But the most important thing to remember is, look at U.S. business has certain rights, and if the Chinese are going after our intellectual property, forced technology transfer, a whole bunch of other things that were agreed to, we have actions that we can take under the Phase 1 agreement. But just changing the relationship between business and government, that's something different. And U.S. businesses ought to be aware of that. And I think the smart ones are. The Chinese government is really going in a different direction, very much reversing the opening that we had all talked about. And this is, to be honest, this is an internal Chinese decision, and it's not up to the U.S. government and or U.S. investors. So everyone ought to be aware and be advised before they move in that direction. There's a change going on there.
I know, and I totally agree. And I'm recalling Look, I used to talk to you every day or every other day, every time I'd go out there and speak to the media. But IP theft was huge. It was almost, they didn't buy enough of our commodities, and of course the trade deficit issue. But IP theft was a unifying principle. One of the reasons why President Trump, in my view, enjoyed so much support, Bob, from all over the map, businesses, labor, consumers, you name it, was this IP theft. As you used to tell me, we can't let them steal our family jewels. Technology breakthroughs, the backbone of the American economy. So if they pull this stuff, aren't all bets off?
Well, we'll see, right? First of all, we want to see some practical examples. For sure, we, President Trump and you and me and Secretary Mnuchin and others changed the relationship between the United States government and China. And it was a whole lot of unfair practices. Probably one of the most important was failure to protect intellectual property, but also forced technology transfer and a variety of other seriously unfair practices. We put in place an agreement. It's a good agreement. Very importantly, we put in place tariffs. One of the unfortunate things that people have talked about recently is restarting this exclusion process. That is a very big mistake, in my opinion. That was never meant to be permanent. These companies have had 3 years now to figure out how to get their products without worrying about those tariffs. It's a big mistake to open up those exclusions again. We certainly would not have done it. But there's a series of unfair practices. But you're right. One of the most important was failure to protect intellectual property and forced technology transfer. Innovation, technology, business practices, that's the lifeblood of the American economy.
Last one, quickly. There was a good Wall Street Journal front page story last week, how we all went after Huawei, which is really an instrumentality of the Chinese Communist Party at this point. We went after them, and we hobbled them, and now they've stayed hobbled. They're in deep trouble. We've kept them out of 5G, and a bunch of countries, we finally were able to persuade a lot of our friends in Europe and especially Asia to keep Huawei out of 5G. Bob, will that stick? Will we remain tough? Will the Bidens remain tough on Huawei and keep them out of 5G? Because they're just spying, and they're just eavesdropping, and they're just stealing our trade secrets. And will these other countries do too?
Well, I believe they will. I believe this is a positive part of the Biden policy. I think they see the threat. Europe is uneven. Let's be honest. Europe doesn't see itself necessarily as our great ally in this battle. They view themselves as an independent pole. So we'll see on that. But I think the Biden policy is in the right position. I thought it was unfortunate that they allowed the Huawei executive out of Canada and then decided really not to prosecute her. I thought that was a sign of weakness. Very, very, it's very risky to show weakness in a situation like with China at a time like this. But I think their policy on Huawei at this point is a good one, and I hope they stick with it. We'll see.
Any of these weakness roads lead to Taiwan. It just seems to me. China is all over it.
It's a very complicated relationship. Things are changing very quickly in China, and people who really study it can see it. As I say, the relationship between the government and business is changing very, very quickly. The military is building up. There is aggression in a variety of areas, and we'll see how it all shakes out. It's a transition right now. We really have to be, I think, strong and stay focused, and at the same time be constructive.
All right. Bob Lighthizer, thank you, sir. Wonderful to see you. Hope you'll come back soon.
Great.